So, good morning, everybody. My name's Nick Hillman. I head up HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, a think tank based in Oxford. And we're absolutely delighted to welcome you to this webinar that is part of the annual Advance HE HEPI series of events that we do every year. This is the first one of 2024. It's on the very topical question, given this is an election year, of whether the future for post-18 education is a tertiary future. There were lots of fantastic articles about that issue floating around before Christmas from people like Mary Colonel Cook and Ian Mansfield and Lucian Hudson and Chris Millward, and indeed from some of our speakers this morning, like Dave Phoenix from LSBU. It's also a question, of course, which has a UK-wide importance. There may be, for example, lots of things that England, the largest part of the UK, could learn from what's been going on in Scotland and Wales. And we have, of course, an expert on Wales this morning as well. It's an issue on which maybe autonomous universities need to learn from FE, and FE will be very well represented this morning too. And it's also an issue, of course, in which the gap between the private sector and the public sector is very important. And in Rachel Samby-Thomas this morning, we've got a speaker who's had great experience in the public sector before joining the university sector as well. So we have a very strong panel. But my only role today is to welcome you to the event. We've got a rich set of other events and a rich publication programme set out for 2024. So do please look at both what HEPI and Advance HE are up to. And just before I hand over to James Dunphy from Advance HE, who's chairing this morning's session, I just want to remind everyone that this is an on-the-record session. So everything you say can be recorded, but I hope that won't hold people back. So I'm delighted now to hand over to our chair for this morning, James Dunphy from our colleagues at Advance HE. James is Collaboration Director for Quality Enhancement and Partnerships, and will introduce the rest of the session. But thank you all for attending. Over to you, James.
Thanks so much, Nick, and good morning, colleagues, and a really warm welcome on behalf of HEPI and Advance HE to this webinar on tertiary education. We're delighted so early in the year that you've been able to make the time to come along to what promises to be a really interesting and engaging session. As Nick mentioned, my name is James Dunphy, and I'm very pleased to be Collaborations Director at Advance HE, previous to which I was Director in Scotland's Funding Council with responsibility for skills policy, funding agreements and tertiary quality. And I've had the absolute pleasure to work with talented colleagues in a variety of different HE settings over the last 20 years. You may know that Advance HE and HEPI have worked together over many years to provide insights and inputs to help inform high quality conversation and policy development across our sector and our public policy landscape. And we at Advance HE are hugely proud of this work and the partnership that we have with HEPI. And this webinar very much continues that tradition. This morning we'll hear first from our assembled panel, whose job it is to provide perspectives, challenge our assumptions and give us food for thought. We have with us this morning David Hughes, who has been Chief Executive of the Association of Colleges since 2016, and before which David was CEO at the Learning and Work Institute, and he's also held senior roles at Learning and Skills Council and the Skills Funding Agency. We've also got Dr. Hugh Morris, who is Director of Skills, Higher Education and Lifelong Learning in the Welsh Government, where Hugh has responsibility for overseeing higher education, further education and the wider post-16 and education training sector in Wales. We have Professor David Phoenix, who is Vice-Chancellor of London South Bank University and Chief Executive of the LSBU Group, which in addition to the university includes South Bank Colleges, South Bank Academies and South Bank Innovation. And last but not least, we have Rachel Samby-Thomas, who has been Registrar at the University of Warwick since 2016, prior to which Rachel held a number of roles in government, including Shadow CEO of the Government's Institute for Apprenticeships. Our panel is going to speak this morning for around 7 to 10 minutes each, and thereafter it really is over to you, with an opportunity to pose questions of the panel and to shape the debate through your experience and expertise. I can tell you, having spent time with the panel this morning, they are full of the joys of 2024 and are looking forward to engaging with you. They are adamant, though, that they do not have all the answers, but I am confident in the rich tradition of collegiate exchange that together we will share and shape an interesting and stimulating conversation over the course of the morning. So without further ado, let me hand over to our first panel member, David Hughes. David, over to you.
Thanks very much, James, and good morning and Happy New Year. I think it's not too late, is it? It's Happy New General Election Year as well, probably. So it puts a kind of quite an important emphasis on this question. We were asked to address three questions. Is it time to think in terms of tertiary rather than FE and HE? Would a more unified system address workforce needs and bolster levelling up better? Is it time to learn from Wales and Scotland? My answer in brief is yes, yes, and yes. But I'll try and expand a little bit. My starting point really is that the current system simply isn't working, and I think there are at least 6 facets or reasons or areas in which it's not working, and that a tertiary system, I think, could help address those. It's not a silver bullet; it wouldn't solve anything overnight. But I think the siloed position we're in at the moment is part of the systemic problem we have. So we have a massive issue that colleges have suffered from austerity for 12 or 13 years. Universities are starting to really feel the pinch after suffering in the last few years. So the system isn't working for 6 big reasons. And I think I want to start with those. The first is an economic one. The current arrangements post-18 or probably post-16 simply aren't meeting the needs of the economy. We know that skills shortages are up. The number of job vacancies that are vacant due to skills shortage and skills gaps has gone up from 22% to around a third in the DfE Employer Skills Survey. Productivity is still flatlining. Economic growth is incredibly weak and has been for at least the last decade and looks set to be weak for the next 4 or 5 years. So there's an economic issue here that the current learning and training and skills and education system post-16, post-18, it really isn't delivering economically. Second is that we live in a changing world. We know that, don't we? We talk about net zero, we talk about digital transformation, we talk about Brexit, perhaps not so much, but all of those reasons, all of those issues are driving a skills and education need, which is not being met by the current system. So we've got a very good system delivering higher level skills. You know, the HE system delivering through colleges, universities and independent providers is doing a really good job. But actually, it's probably at the expense of the other bit of the system, which delivers to meet the needs of at least half of the population. The technical skills, the intermediate and higher technical skills, the basic skills. We still have probably something like 9 million adults with poor literacy and numeracy and more with poor digital skills. And we invest far too little in that group of people. So the changing world is a really big issue, that the needs of the world we're moving into are not being met by the system. The third, and the one that's most important to me personally, is fairness. We have a fantastic route through to university or HE and colleges for those who get good A-levels or a good level 3 qualification. And that is well trodden, well understood, and delivers really well for a whole load of people. But if you don't get a good level 3 at age 18 or 19, the system is really poor. The investment in you is really, really low. Adult funding has halved since 2010. Only about 1 in 5 employers offer apprenticeships. So the offer to people who aren't privileged to go onto HE is really, really weak. And I think that will matter more if there's a change in government. Fourth, public perceptions have changed. The cost of living crisis is probably driving it. More families are questioning the value of a 3-year residential degree as an investment, not only because they're worried that there won't be a return in terms of salaries, but also because of the cost of actually doing a 3-year residential degree with maintenance loans just not meeting the needs. Recent Public First polling showed that more people now are talking about FE and apprenticeships as relevant to them and important to them than HE. So some really big changes in public perception. Fifth, public spending is incredibly tight. We know that. There's high inflation, high debt, poor economic growth means that for the next 5 years, there won't be very much money around, and therefore tough decisions are going to be made. Well, if we have those tough decisions in the siloed world we're in, I think we're going to get some really perverse and horrible outcomes. And then 6, we know that employer investment in education skills training is lower than most other OECD countries. And I think part of the reason is the complexity of the system. Now, a tertiary system on its own just won't simply address all of those things, but I think the tertiary system is a necessary precondition to be able to start to offer a much more joined up a set of pathways and ambitions for people. So I think the tertiary approach will work. What could it do? It's probably 4 or 5 things I think that a tertiary system might be able to deliver quite quickly. One is much clearer pathways and probably better pathways for learners. So that idea that it isn't a 3-year residential degree or nothing, there needs to be other offers, and those offers need to be much more local and connected to the labour market and connected to real jobs. Second, an offer to all adults. We have a system where, you know, if you get a level 3, you can do HE. If you need basic skills or level 2 or level 3 qualifications, there's a cap on learner numbers. That just doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel right. A system that tries to open that up and offer something to everyone, I think, is really important. Third, a stronger case. The case we're making collectively to Treasury, to the general public, I think it's just not strong enough. And we've got to make that investment case much, much more compellingly together, in my view, across the whole of the tertiary education system. If we're going to compete with the very, very compelling case for health, for welfare, for defence in the world we live in, for all sorts of other areas of investment that have been starved through austerity, and we're just not cutting through, I think. Fourth is a tertiary system could provide much more clarity for employers about where to invest their own money, a much more targeted and prioritised set of interventions. And then fifth, if we're going to really get the investment we need in the next 5 to 10 years, we shouldn't just be looking to the Department for Education. We've got to look to other government departments. We've got to show how colleges and universities, education skills training deliver for net zero, for health, for the industrial strategy. You know, there are all sorts of skills needs at levels 3, 4, 5, 6 and above, which will not be met by the current system, in my view. So what do we need? We definitely need a tertiary regulator and funder. We need to learn from Wales. We need much more distinct and clear missions for universities and colleges. Now, not every university is alike, not every college is alike. So in different parts of the country, that will look different, but playing to the strengths, working together to make sure there's a joined up offer. I think we can learn a lot from Scotland in that. It's not perfect in Scotland, but I think it's better. We need a long-term investment plan across the whole of government. We need to tap into some of that net zero investment. We need to show that the health workforce plan can't be delivered without a joined up tertiary approach. We need an industrial strategy leading an economic strategy. Fourth, we need to be able to make the case to employers, and we need them to step up their investment. And then finally, we need colleges and universities to work together locally and regionally to be able to show how their offer and the pathways work, but also nationally, we need to lobby together. We're not doing that. We look as though we're fighting each other. Fighting each other probably means we both lose. I think we just got to join up. I think a tertiary approach could be a different approach. I think personally, Labour will be quite interested in it. They'll want to show that they're making a difference. They won't have loads of money to spend, but some changes to the way the system operates could achieve some efficiencies and could achieve some better outcomes. So I'll leave it there and pass on to Hugh.
Many thanks, David. Hugh, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, James, and thanks, David. I should start by saying that I am not currently the Director of Skills, Higher Education, Lifelong Learning in the Welsh Government. I'm on secondment to University College London, where I work in the Institute of Education. So the comments I'm going to make are really about the broad principle of tertiary. They're informed by experiences I've had in the past, but they're not limited to that. And what I'd like to do this morning is make 5 proposals about how to create a tertiary education system. 4 of these proposals will sound quite simple, but they require a lot of work. By contrast, the 5th and last point sounds simple, but it's perhaps the hardest because it requires you and your colleagues to change your view of yourselves and your place in our education system and wider society. So point 1. The tertiary education system should cover all current and potential adult learners in post-compulsory education. In short, it should be concerned with people from entry level to level 8. Why? Why? Because the UK has gone backwards on adult education over the last 25 years. If you compare the Basic Skills Agency report on skills in the UK in 1997 with the Leach report in 2006, and then the most recent report from the OECD on skills in the UK, they will demonstrate that UK has gone forward, as David said, at great pace with higher education, but backwards with skills for non-graduate adults. There are now 9 million people of working age in the UK who have not got beyond level 1 in literacy and numeracy. That's primary school level. If we are to realise the benefits of what Martin Trowell anticipated 50 years ago would be a universal system of post-compulsory education, with more than 50% of the population engaged, we need to provide for everyone and support them to achieve their potential at every level. So point 2, tertiary provision should be coordinated regionally because the skills needs of employers, the aspiration of communities and the ambitions of learners in the Northeast are different from those in London, and they're different in the Southwest from the West Midlands. A call for this type of arrangement has been a consistent theme in proposals for the UK over the last 100 years. So whether it was Lord Haldane in the early 1900s or the Oakes report in 1978, or the Learning Society in 1998, or more recent proposals on the HEPI website in December from Mike Shattuck or from Andy Westwood and David Hughes on the Wonky website, we need to make this change if there's to be any long-lasting levelling up and inclusive growth. Point 3, the funding of these arrangements should be more fluid and not constrained by the finance logic of student loans, apprenticeship levies and grants based on student numbers. There should instead be a pot to be distributed locally using funds drawn down proportionally from all who will benefit, whether that is the student, the employer or community. This could be a mix of loan finance and in-year expenditure, but it shouldn't be the current arrangement of 6 separate and siloed systems that don't talk to each other. The justification for high levels of funding for universities in comparison with adult education and apprenticeships has historically been that this will support higher GDP and productivity growth and/or social mobility, as well as higher salaries for the group of graduates that will then trickle down to wider members of society. Today, it's much less evident that growth, productivity and social mobility are powered by this motor, but it's very evident that there are significant skill shortages David has touched on, which are holding communities and employers back. It's time to focus the money on where the problems and issues are most acute. Point 4, tertiary education provision should connect with research and innovation capability on an international, national and regional level. Why? Why? Because existing provision is highly centralised and in danger of becoming even more so if we only invest in big kit. This is not an argument for spreading the jam thinly, but it is an argument for recognising the role of less capital-intensive research and innovation in helping people to be happy, healthy and good neighbours. Local research and innovation is vital in making sure that there are people who can take advantage of this activity for work, for pleasure or to help other people. We need broad understandings if we're going to build the workforce of tomorrow and more cohesive communities. So my 5th and final point, there should be a new legal form of organisations engaged in tertiary education, either in their own right or as part of a bigger group or federation. This new form, let's call it a tertiary education community, should provide equal governance rights to staff, local employers and community representatives, and should balance the interests of apprenticeship, vocational and higher education provision. This may not be for all institutions, but it should be for a significant number, and to encourage the adoption of this approach, it may be necessary to tie benefits to this form of organisation. To support these arrangements, the information systems and quality assurance arrangements, as well as staff and leadership development, should be aligned to support the diversity of this activity. This means, and here's the difficult point, that representative and lobby bodies that support this activity should change their names and ambitions. So I look forward to events in the near future sponsored by Advance HE, supported by TEPI, and reported on by Wonk TE. As someone once said, you need to be the change you want to see in the world. I think it's time to make that change. And I'm going to hand over to David Phoenix, unless James tells me it should be someone else.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Hugh. And over to you, David.
Thank you, colleagues. And thank you for the chance to speak at today's event. So, as other colleagues have said, I argued in my HEPI piece that our current educational sectors have so many dysfunctional overlaps that we have little choice but to move to a tertiary system. And I think there are some lessons we can learn from Scotland and Wales, but that doesn't provide us with all the solutions. So, for example, as I argued in my paper, I think when we're talking about tertiary, we need to be clear we're talking about post-16, because even that's not agreed. Why do I think it's post-16? Because a lot of the overlap, the duplication and the dysfunction comes from interactions between schools and school sixth form colleges, as well as between colleges and universities. So you need to look at that spectrum. And secondly, if we're really interested in a functional system, then we need to be engaging with people from 14 to 16 around different styles of learning, which means we need to be clear on what happens after 16 in terms of the routes forward. So I do think we need an integrated system, and I think it's got to address at least 3 or 4 things. The first is the fact that the current system is highly inefficient and ineffective because it's based on a quasi-market-based approach, which doesn't give us the benefits of a market because it's managed. But what it does do is mean that a lot of the focus is on institutional need, not the need of learning in society. As funding constraints have got tighter in academies, in colleges, and now in universities, those institutions are seeking to broaden their sources of income. They're taking on different activities to generate revenue. And that's leading to more generalist institutions and overlap and competition between institutions, which doesn't add societal benefit. So what's my evidence of well, if you look between about 2000 and 2007, since 2007, we've created around 200 new sixth form colleges, even though the number of 16 to 18-year-olds has stayed roughly flat during that time. So logic dictates that with now 200 more institutions, they must be teaching smaller units. The other impact of course, is that there's been fewer people progressing to colleges. And because schools tend to hold on to their more able students in terms of academic classroom-based delivery, it means that the colleges tend to deal with significantly more students that need catch-up support for maths and English. And that can be a problem for colleges because those students that require additional support alongside the level 3 qualifications they do, so additional support for maths and English, if they need to move into 18 to 19, an extra year of study, colleges get about 17% less funding for that year than for 16 to 18. So you've got students with greater need, but less funding. In addition, colleges have generally worked around level 4 and 5 and access programs. But as universities are finding that they need to diversify, you're getting more universities now undertaking foundation entry, with a 3-fold increase in that in recent years. And you're also getting universities moving into level 4 and 5 standalone activity, although many have been there for a considerable time, other than moving into that space. So you end up with a squeeze from the schools and a squeeze from the universities and colleges. And the reviews have shown that what that means is the colleges are teaching very small class sizes, which makes it difficult for them to deliver efficiently. And it also makes it difficult for them to specialise in high-cost subject areas. And that level of competition is going to get worse because as colleges seek to diversify, you've got more colleges now moving into degree level. There are currently 5 colleges and 1 college group, which contains 2 colleges, that have foundation degree awards. 1 college and 2 college groups, which have 10 colleges between them, and that have got bachelor degree awards. We've got 131 colleges that have got franchise arrangements with universities, and we've got some colleges moving into master's production. Now, in cold spots, having a large college with mixed mode delivery can be quite beneficial, although there are perhaps other ways that could also be. But this approach to a more generalist delivery means that it's very difficult to form effective educational pathways because everybody's trying to do the same thing. And for an effective pathway, you need a degree of specialism and to agree that institution X is going to specialise in a certain activity, and institution Y will specialise in something else. So you can then create a pathway which allows them. I think that's going to become increasingly important because, as David said, we're in a financially constrained environment, and that's not going to change whichever. And having more and more colleges having to deliver smaller classes, having more and more schools delivering smaller classes, and having a lack of effective integration so that we've got those duplications, means that we have a system that's cost inefficient. And we've got to take some responsibility to actually free up funding to make sure that the institutions that are delivering have the cash that they need. And that won't necessarily be new. And there are ways around that. Within LSBU, for example, we have created a group with a university. Within our colleges, we've got a gateway colleges focusing on adults, a technical college focusing on level 3 to 4. And we've got a range of academies, including a new technical city. And it's very clear what each institution does. And that's allowed us to create a group level pathways. But what's been most powerful is the discussion between leaders from the different sectors and the levels of innovation that's allowed them to create by being clear on what it is they're delivering and what the barriers are to progression at those transition points between the different organisations. So we've got an ineffective system. Ineffective in terms of the way it operates and in terms of the cost of delivery. We've also got an overly bureaucratic system. We have got multiple regulators at tertiary level, including work with Ofsted, OFS, multiple professional and statutory regulatory bodies, and IFET. And just to give you some examples at level 4 and 5 of where that's about the best place where you can see this dysfunction. If level 4 and 5, first and second year of the degree is taught as part of the degree, then it's clearly OFS. If level 4 and 5 are standalone qualifications, such as HNCs, they're also assured by OFS, unless they're taught in colleges when they're covered by Ofsted. Level 4 apprenticeships are assured by Ofsted, irrespective of whether they're in colleges or universities. Level 4 H2Qs are assured by OFS in universities, but Ofsted in HEPI or Ofcom. And then IFET has a role in defining the standards, and many professional bodies are also required to be involved in defining those standards. And those different forms of regulation not just add cost, but they actually make it more difficult for different organisations with different regulations to collaborate and creating effective pathways and taking ownerships for different parts of those pathways. And again, there are ways around this. Universities have been validating courses for hundreds of years. There are colleges of significant scale that have got vast experience of delivery of level 4 courses. Why couldn't we have a simple regulator that could count mark institutions based on their experience and their history and allow them to respond more rapidly by validating their own programs based on local needs? So we've got cost inefficiency both in terms of the way we operate and the way we regulate. We've also got an impact in the complexity and range of qualifications, with some being overseen by private providers, others by public sector. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for learners to navigate those pathways and those qualifications with certainty. So, for example, we've got overlap between two levels: advanced generals, such as BTECs, and level 4 apprenticeships, level 3 apprenticeships. It's very difficult for people who aren't on that main route of A-level to university to actually really navigate and understand the different opportunities. And we've also got the fact that to expand activity, all these institutions are jumping into these qualifications. A plethora of delivery points, which adds to that confusion and makes it very difficult for people effective advice and guidance, which is impacting on the number of people that we get to level 4 and 5, as well as the number that are getting basic skills. So to close, what is the way forward? We do need a skills counsellor, but perhaps it's better calling it skills and productivity, because the worst thing is that it becomes a workforce planning device. It's got to look at skills in the context of regions, national requirement, and international dimensions. It's got to look at innovation and with investment in innovation.
Thank you very much, David. Really helpful.
Thank
you very much. And Rachel, over to you.
Thank you. So I find myself in a complete dilemma, because normally I'm somebody who kind of knows fairly definitely what I think and what I don't think. And I don't know what I think in this space. So I hear a lot about, and I have and read quite a lot about tertiary education. And in many ways, I think actually some of the contributions that we've heard today have been the most helpful contributions to my thinking so far. And it's not, I don't think, because there is not fairly wide recognition and agreement about what the problems are, the fact that there really are problems and the fact that they need to fix them, but it's more about what the solution to those problems is. And so I remain curious, but still slightly jury out as to what a tertiary system looks like and whether or not it is actually the answer to the problems that we have, or whether or not it is actually going to end up being an expensive distraction. So when I started first thinking about this, I was kind of asking myself, what is the purpose? Why is there perceived to be a need for this? One of the obvious things is pathways, which I absolutely agree with all of the previous speakers and have been a long advocate for pathways since I was Director General for Skills, as I was between 2012 and 2016. So I think the pathways work is absolutely essential. And I do see that a tertiary oversight could really help those pathways. So I'm in agreement in this. However, there can be a tendency when looking at this to immediately go into the regulator point of view. And when I have talked to some of Hughes' previous colleagues, when I was trying to explore what is actually happening in Wales, I mean, so far from what they told me, all they've really done is recreate a regulator for higher education, which isn't going to be called the OFS, but in many ways looks very like the OFS. And that seems to me not what the level of ambition should be. So it's not that I am saying that there shouldn't be regulation, and I completely agree with the points that David Phoenix made about the ridiculous overlap of regulation, which is happening all over the place. It happens in HE, it happens in FE, it probably happens in schools. But whether or not having one super duper oversight regulator for everything, quite frankly, scares me rigid, because the success or otherwise will be on the competency of that regulator and how they do it. And whether or not the solutions lie in regulation or whether they lie in policy, I don't know. And I don't think that there has been enough thought put behind actually analysing what the various problems are, which we've had a lot of the problems, and as I say, I agree with all of them, but actually what the solutions to those should be, and then whether or not those solutions lead to us to a tertiary education. And if that is the case, what does that look like? So does it, for example, does it look like there being somebody in government, hopefully informed and advised by people who are involved in the system, who is given that oversight? Or does it look like it's a regulator? Or what does it look like? Now, some of you may know that I have, I'm on the Labour Party, I'm one of their Council of Skills Advisors, and we have put together a proposal, which I do feel quite passionately about forming a new body called Skills England. So in some ways, you could think that Skills England could have that tertiary oversight, because it is the purpose of this body is to not only look at current skills needs and skills provision, but also to be informed by future trends and to be informed by looking internationally, etc. Marrying all parts of government together, so it spans the whole of government rather than just being based in, used to be BIS, now DFE, and working together with all of the social partnerships and bringing and businesses, so right across government, right across business, right across all the, bringing in the sector skills councils, basically working with everybody so that we have a comprehensive oversight of what is needed, what the provision is, and how that is being fixed. Now, whether or not that is what people are talking about when they're talking about tertiary education, I'm not sure. I am a big advocate for Skills England. I'm not a big advocate for a super duper, very, very complex, because this area is really complex, regulator doing everything, because I think that is a very, very high risk strategy. The other thing that concerns me about this as well, I'm not saying no, never or anything, but you know, the issue of scaling in England is very different from the scale in Wales and in Scotland, and indeed in Northern Ireland, and indeed in Ireland, where they have or are moving to a tertiary education, and New Zealand, where they also have it. I mean, when I was DG Skills before, I used to look at envy with my counterparts, because they had something like, 12 universities and so many colleges. I mean, we were, even in one of the regions in England, we had far, far greater variety of provision that was there, but we had very, very few levers in order to actually reduce that complexity and reduce the amount of institutions. And there was very little political will to actually do that, because nobody wants their local FE college to be closed or forced to merge somewhere. So we did try and foster kind of regional conversations to see where those overlaps and that competition that David mentioned, with which I completely agree, how that could be reduced. But there was no carrot and there was no stick, and those conversations pretty much came to naught. But the issue of size is relevant to the ease of how we actually do this. And again, I'm torn in my mind, because I agree with everybody that, I think the system itself is absolutely broken, and we absolutely need to look at the whole system for all of the reasons that everybody has said. But there is also a kind of a tension between local, regional and national leads, which again, hopefully, if we were to create something like Skills England, we'd be looking and trying to marry and align all of those different needs. So I'm a huge fan of what South Bank University with its education partners has done down there. But one of the reasons I think it works so well is because it's small, you can get your hands around it, and it's containable, and it is absolutely based in its place and its locality. But quite how you get and you duplicate that or replicate that in other areas of the country, I'm just not clear about. So, and as I said at the beginning, I am worried that if we go down the wrong path for probably all the right reasons, that we might end up curing nothing, but putting a lot of time and effort into trying to make it work. And that could be a distraction. So it's not my natural bent. I'm normally an opportunist. I like opportunities, I like challenges, but I'm also very wary of kind of, without a proper analysis of where the systems, where the problems in the systems lie, and how you and what the solutions should be, and whether or not that leads you to the tertiary education. That's the way my mind works, rather than alighting on something which does sound good, but might not actually fix the systems. And I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Super helpful. A big thank you to each of our panel members for sharing their expertise and their provocations. I hope you found that useful. We heard a lot in those contributions about improved pathways, the benefits of extended collaboration, but also some really important provocations and questions about who owns tertiary change. Is it institutions, is it regulators, or is it government? And we also heard some interesting perspectives about how in the different UK nations there are different sizes of the systems, and that brings different ranges of complexity, something for us no doubt to reflect on. We also had a really important comment in the chat that I wanted to draw our attention to, which was around where the student voice is in debates like these, the role of the student and the impact of reform in making the student experience better was a ribbon in many of the contributions that we held, but it's a good point, well made, and something we should reflect on. We're going to turn now to the Q&A, so thanks so much to everybody who has taken the time to post in the chat bar. I'm going to, in the first instance, turn to 3 colleagues who've posted comments in the chat. And I'm going to start, if that's okay, with James Robson, and then go to Lucy Hare, and then from Lucy to Jennifer Somerton. So James, over to you if you don't mind.
Oh, hi there. I think my can you hear me okay? Excellent. Thanks so much, everybody, for your contributions. I think this is such an important conversation, and there are some really nuanced analyses here. I think my first question that I put in the chat is really about funding, and it's for Hugh. Hugh, you sort of highlighted the complexity of the current funding system, but all of this is going to be about money. You know, it's just fundamental to this conversation. You suggested, I think, a sort of centralized tertiary education pot, which sounds very interesting, but I wonder if you could flesh that proposal out a little bit for us to get a sense of what you really mean by that.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, James. And it's great to speak to somebody else who's got the title tertiary in their job title. I hope all's well at Oxford. So I'll just say a little bit about the current system, and I'll try not to go on too long because I could talk for years about this. The 6 siloed systems are student loans for HE, grants for FE, the RSG for 6th forms in local authorities, apprenticeship levy for apprenticeships, postgraduate fees for home and other students, and then overseas fees. They all have different logics. A number of them are broken. You will have seen the Institute for Fiscal Studies report yesterday about the current in-year costs of the changed accounting method for student loans, which adds £10 billion to the cost of student loans per year. You may not have seen on the Department for Education website their forecast modelling of the additional costs of student loans to 2030, which is between £5 and £8 billion. The amount of money that's going to come from non-dom changes is £3 billion. The amount of money that's going to come from the tax changes to private schools is £1.5 billion. So I think people in the higher education community, wherever they are, need to wake up to these future costs. At the moment, because of the in-year costs of HE going up, that's covered off in all parts of the UK by taking money away from other elements of education, principally FE. I'm trying very hard not to get myself embroiled in any politics in this, but you will only have to read the papers to see the scale of the cuts that are planned in different parts to accommodate that. The apprenticeship levy has over time been focused on older workers who are in jobs in companies, and it's replacing courses that previously were paid for by companies. It's massively inefficient and it's full of dead weight. And then you could read today a paper on the HEPI website by Jeff Frank and Norman Gower looking at the discrepancies in overseas fee income and postgraduate fees and how that's influencing the pattern provision and threatening the well-being of strong universities on the outskirts of major conurbations. Now, I think that what you need to do is recognise that these funding pots need to be brought together. There's a way of doing that. That's what governments historically always did. I'm not advocating for an England regulator. That's why I was keen to talk about regions. The UK has 9 regions with about 3 million people in most of them, 1 region with about 8 million. Other sensible organised systems operate at that regional or lander or state or other level. I'm not. I think the interesting issue with devolution, whether you talk about Northern Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, is that people that are trying to find a way to doing something that works for their locality. They're constrained because lots of those funding systems I've mentioned are actually UK-wide systems. They're not systems that are organised at a national level. I'll stop there, but I am happy to come and see you, James, and we could talk about it loads more.
Thanks very much, Hugh, and I hope that was helpful, James. Lucy, over to you.
Hi there. My question is just from a parent point of view, which I guess is partly from a student point of view, parent-student point of view. If anyone's been through it, they'll probably know this, but when you get to age 16 in the UK, certainly in England, you are sort of left to your own devices, really, as to what to do next as a student. There's sort of almost no system to follow for where you go. And I just wonder if a lot of people get lost at that stage, and that puts them on what I'm describing as a potluck trajectory. You know, it's just, you know, what should we do next? I mean, in London, for example, there are literally thousands of schools and FE colleges that you could apply to, and you can apply to any, these are state ones, and then, you know, see what happens. It's impossible to research them all. There's no UCAS. I'm not casting any blame on the schools and colleges. They do their very, very best, but they've got their priorities teaching, getting the kids through GCSEs or their BTECs or whatever. Can that bit be streamlined, organised? I don't even think it would take that much funding, but just think about it from the user point of view.
Thanks so much, Lucy. And Jennifer, we might take your question and then go back to the panel, if that's okay.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Great, thanks. So yeah, I was asking really about how universities might be able to manage tensions between different agendas, regional, national and international ones, and remain globally competitive while still meeting place-based needs. I think this is less about the kind of logistical elements of how a tertiary system might work, but actually if we had one, would higher education institutions be able to act properly within it? I think David referred to, you know, universities becoming quite generalist in their approach and trying to be all things to all people. And we're trying to move away from that, but I worry a little bit that I don't disagree with the tertiary system, but I wonder whether that might actually make the generalization of education a little bit more appealing to some institutions. Thanks,
Jennifer. Colleagues on the panel, who wants to come in? David, and then David Phoenix.
Yeah, I'll address the post-16 bit. I mean, the transition at 16 is a real mess, isn't it? What we see generally is those young people who've achieved least well are the ones who have to make the biggest change, and that's because there's competition in the system for really only those who are going on to a level 3 course. So school sixth forms, of which there are something like 2,000, about half of that number in England have got less than 200 students, which means all they're offering really is a very narrow A-level offer, which is great for some kids, but you know, there are schools that offer 6 or 7 A-levels only, which I think is just not fair to the learners. And the ones who have struggled in the system in Key Stage 4, who've got weak GCSEs, are the ones who have to make the biggest transition. And many schools, not all of them, but many schools just dismiss them. They're just not interested. They're not going to stay in the school sixth form. So they're left to their own devices, and just exactly in the way that you described. So the argument for a local kind of system of 16 to 18 provision that looks at the capacity to meet the needs of the whole cohort is compelling. You know, the argument for less competition and more collaboration is compelling. The big question, a bit like the whole tertiary argument or discussion, is who would lead it, who would run it? Because, you know, local authorities were completely dismissed in that role by the coalition government when they came in. I don't think Labour are going to suddenly put them in that role. So there's a question about who would run that system. But the argument to have a system is really, really compelling to help young people navigate to the right option for them.
Thanks, David. David Phoenix.
Thank you. It's interesting the discussion we're having. I was recently reading some text on the history of the institution. And 100 years ago, the leaders of Borough, which was the predecessor of LSBU, were discussing the need for technical junior schools and the balance between universities and what that means in terms of skill systems. And part of what we've got to do is make sure that we're looking to future requirements and learning from the past in terms of why we've failed to achieve a more integrated structure. The point I was trying to make, I think, in the position I was making was that what it will require is a degree of more specialist institutions that are all appropriately funded. And for example, if you look at our technical sector, it's got a limited number of programs, but they're very applied, and they work closely with industry. And since we developed that focus, not only did that give clarity about how it could interact with the other parts, but we've seen application numbers go up over 100%. There is a real desire for people that don't want a more traditional route to have other opportunities, but they have to be one from the scratch. And that's where I think the council idea, I don't think it is a regulator. I 100% agree with Rachel. What I think we need, though, is a body that looks at the complexity of this process in terms of the place-based requirement, but also the national requirement within that international context. And it's got to take into account innovation and other funding sources. We spend quite a lot through local government. Some of that infrastructure could be used to attract industry that could be aligned with local need, which could then be aligned with skills requirements if we had a more integrated skills and poverty account. In terms of the question about the need to focus, that's absolutely key for me. In terms of LSBU, by having the group structure, what it's enabling me to do is gradually increase our research and enterprise and our work with business, which is promoting that international knowledge. And one of the interesting aspects of that is we're having multiple governments now asking to work with us because they want to develop overseas institutions that actually provide this skills-based applied focus. It's what a university of technology would seem to be in other countries. And a university of technology has to have international standing as well as being linked to. And just as a final comment, the way that can link back, if you had a council looking at the totality of this, if we're trying to drive productivity, and that's one of the biggest drivers of inequality across the country, is these regional differentiations in productivity. There's no reason why we couldn't be exporting some of those concepts around skill-based delivery in collaboration with UK-based industry, so that we're delivering other countries with the soft skills, but also with the products from the UK industry that they have. So it is complex, it's big picture, but I think that's why we need a cross-departmental council that's looking at strategy and frameworks, not getting bogged down in the detail of regulation. It's the principles and how you join it with funding that is available.
Many thanks, David. Hugh, we might come to you and then go back to some more questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'll try and be quick. So there have been proposals in the past for regional forms of organisation. In the 1970s, Shirley Williams ran a series of cross-departmental reviews which recommended that as part of the Oakes report. And then again, under the Conservative government in 1980, Robert McFarlane proposed a tertiary system for 16 to 19-year-olds, which was agreed by everybody, but vetoed by Margaret Thatcher. I can give you many other examples of this. The two reasons that it doesn't happen: institutions do not want to lose autonomy. within the FE or HE or apprenticeship area, they do not want to give up autonomy. So if you ask institutions to adopt a regional arrangement, they won't. And secondly, civil servants and politicians don't give up power. So what was more likely to happen is that places like the West Midlands and Manchester and the Central Belt in Scotland and London will want to have access to these things to promote community cohesion and economic growth. And that the pressure will come from the middle, not from the bottom or from central government.
Many thanks, Hugh. Let's go back to questions. We've got Peter Scott and Mary Cunnick-Cook, but we also have an anonymous attendee. So I will ask that question and then we'll go to Peter and Mary. So the anonymous question panel is, can you share your view of how the lifelong learning entitlement may support tertiary or a collaborative approach rather than an HE approach to skills and workforce development? And Peter, will come to you if that's okay to ask your question.
Can you hear me now? Is that
can, Peter?
Yeah.
Good to hear from you, sir.
I think actually members of the panel, particularly Hugh, have already actually addressed my question. So I'll be very brief. I mean, I agree that a centralized Whitehall solution is never going to work in a tertiary context. I think that's obvious. I think the standard English regions don't really work either in most cases. City regions, I mean, Hugh mentioned it, in a way, the natural regions, Greater Manchester, the West Midlands, Greater London, and others. My question is why we haven't actually involved kind of metro mayors in this kind of discussion. My impression is they're very much outside that. They're given very significant powers in key economic areas like public transport, which affect people's private lives, but also the economy, the environment, all these issues, but somehow they've been kept at bay when it comes to skills and education. Now, I understand some of the reservations to do with autonomy and so on, that's not welcome, particularly perhaps by universities. But I think we have to press that button much more strongly if we're going to actually get a realistic conclusion.
Many thanks, Peter. And Mary, we might come to you if that's okay, and then return to the panel.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me, James? Yeah, excellent. Hello, everybody, and great discussion. But I note it's mostly about, what organisations we need to make all this work. And I agree very much with Rachel that the scale in England makes it very difficult to just do what's happening in Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland. I think my feeling is that if you have unified funding routes for students, so it's really clear where they get funding, and a really clear qualifications or apprenticeship offer that's got kind of brand value and public trust and understanding, that you probably would have all the institutions kind of falling in behind student demand. At the moment, it's just a mess, isn't it? BTECs are being defunded. Nobody's got any confidence in T-levels, HTQs that haven't even appeared on the public radar, and apprenticeships are popular, but there aren't enough of them available. So I think my question is really to Rachel. What is this new Skills Council? Is it a regulator, or is it a bit like UK CES used to be, a sort of policy and information ginger group? If it were successful, what might it achieve in say 5 or 10 years' time?
Thank you. That's a absolutely great question, and I absolutely agree with you, Mary, about what you said about if we could get the kind of the funding and the qualifications kind of all aligned. I do think institutions would fall behind it. So I think what the Skills England would do would be to look. It wouldn't be a regulator, absolutely not. There is a question about overlap with IFATES and whether or not it should be doing quality assurance and that kind of thing. Personally, my personal views, I don't think it should, because I think it'll get bogged down and I get bogged down into the weeds and the practicalities. And obviously it needs to be aware of what actually happens in the system, but I don't think it should take on a function which is at that level. So the idea very much is in dialogue and partnership with all levels of the social partners, and as I said, across Whitehall, that it would be doing some of the stuff that UKCES did in the kind of the more horizon scanning and seeing what is available, which UKCES did do. But it would go wider and probably in some ways get its hands a bit dirtier than UKCES did. It needs to look at the system, I think, across and be able to point out to governments and recommend to governments where things are not working. As we know, be relatively, well, in some ways relatively easy, but also relatively complex, because it's easy to say what's not working well. And funding is a huge element of that. And I don't think any incoming government is going to have an easy silver bullet answer to that. But it should be able to make recommendations about how the system should be better aligned across, so it is in all the ways that everybody's been talking about. And also it should provide alignment, which doesn't seem to me to exist at the moment, between what is happening locally, what is happening regionally, and what is happening nationally, as well as internationally too, because at the moment, inward investment is seen in a completely different part of the HMG forest than skills, which is completely daft, because the first thing that any inward investor asks is, well, do you have the skilled workforce that is there? So all of this needs to be looked at in a very kind of comprehensive sort of way. So I think it's systems, strategies, alignment, and dialogue would be the kind of the four things I would pick out of its major strands of its role.
Can I come in, James?
Yeah, of course.
I think there's a link, isn't there, between all of these questions and in the chat as well, which is, I mean, it's partly about resources, but I think it's also about the nature of the education landscape. And we've got a very competitive system, and Dave talked about that. What we know about competitive markets is that they deliver to the most privileged and the most able and the most and the wealthiest. So 16 to 18, there's massive competition for those who are doing a full level 3, particularly A levels, and no competition for those who are neat and need poor, who need literacy and numeracy. Post 18, we have massive competition for HE students, but no competition whatsoever really for other students, because there's not enough money. So what I think we need is intervention at the margins to try to make sure the system is delivering what's needed by the economy and what's needed in terms of inclusion and what's needed by the whole population. Now, you need to do that at all levels. You need a national approach, and Rachel's description of what Skills England could do if Labour get elected, I think is good. But you definitely, coming to Peter's question about mayoral combined authorities, you need mayors involved in that as well. So we talk to the Metro mayors a lot, and they're really keen to get more engaged. What they don't need is all the money. They don't need the funding. What they need is the ability to direct provision towards their priorities in terms of economic development and inclusion. So if Andy Burnham or Andy Street, or any of the Steve Rotherham or any of the others want to improve economic development in their area, which they do, what they need is some ability to influence what colleges and universities do with the resources that are available to them. And they need to be able to engage the employers who are critical to drive demand for the right sorts of skills and training that will work for people. For adults, the decision to get involved in skills training is a wholly rational decision about return on investment. If you've got decent skills, you only invest in yourself in terms of training if you think you're going to get paid better. It's almost totally true. Therefore, we need signalling to people about what are the qualifications and training that will work in the local or regional labour market. That can only be done at a sort of local, regional level. It should be led by elected mayors, and that could join up. Just quickly on the LLE, I mean, I think the LLE is kind of half of an answer, but without the other half, which is the driving demand for the right sorts of things, I think it will fail miserably. If we let it fail, by the way, I mean colleges and universities as two big sectors, then I think we're really missing an opportunity. I think we should embrace the LLE and make it work and show whatever the next government is, that we as a sector can step up and deliver on one of the government's priorities, which will be how do you close the skills gaps? How do you improve productivity? And you've got to do that tying industrial strategy with skills strategy. That has to be done nationally as well as locally.
Many thanks, David. And David, Phoenix, over to you for the last word on this, if that's okay.
I think 2 points. I think the principles behind the LLE are really important, and we should get behind them. I think there is a danger that the LLE doesn't greatly take us forward, and actually it could make things worse, because, for example, by moving things like some of the non-prescribed courses, we may end up further supporting courses that should be underpinned by business funding rather than government funding. So we further push an employer-based benefit skills system rather than actually a more thoughtful funded system. So I think the principles are important, but I think we've got to look at the future requirements, not actually base everything on the past, and there is a danger that it doesn't have value in the actual context. I think in terms of Peter's point, I think that as a last reflection, there is quite rightly focus on an effective skill system supporting those that are currently losing out. You know, that 9 million adult learners that aren't at basic skill level. The fact we're one of the few OECD countries where our young people are coming out with weaker numeracy and literacy than our retiring cohort. But we can't forget the fact that a full skill system has to look at doctoral level research, etc. as well. And you can't drive everything, therefore, through a central government structure. The concept of the council, as Rachel says, has to be around policy and framework and influence to help people specialise. If we move down a route where we're trying to control either a national or regional, I think what we will see is less innovation, and we will see a range of unintended consequences that will really be detrimental to the country moving forward. So it's about facilitation and using funding levers in line with the principle and strategy to enable leaders to be accountable for it, rather than having somebody try and manage it in and of themselves.
Thanks very much, David. I wanted, just before we ask the panel to give their final thoughts, I wanted just to draw 2 comments that we had in the chat bar. So one was from Jerry White, who pointed out tertiary might be positive, but needs to be connected to secondary education. I think that's a really important point around the connected skills ecosystem that we might be looking to try to create for young people, but also for individuals who are in the workplace too. And Mike Shattuck's point around the need for decentralisation. I think there's another way of framing that as well, Mike, which is around local ownership. The very best examples of really high impact partnership that I've seen over the arc of my career have been based in local ownership, and David Phoenix's examples that he gave earlier in the call, I think are really good examples of that. Colleagues on the panel, I'll pass back to you if that's okay for some final remarks. And Hugh, I will come to you as I see you're unmuted, if that's okay.
Oops. Yeah, can you hear me, James? Yeah. So I'd be very brief. The current system, as Steve West has said in question and answers, is a mess and needs to be sorted out. There's clearly a case for different powers and roles at different levels, and there needs to be some serious thinking about that. At the moment, we have a lot of very major unintended consequences, which are negative for significant groups in society and for particular institutions. So I don't think we should be fearful of changing arrangements. Quite often you get better outcomes by sharing resources and sharing thinking than you do by trying to compete with all your neighbours. I think there's been some agreement on that. What I'd quite like to do is move the debate beyond the why to the what and the how and the when and the where. And I think, just pick up the last point, the point that David Hughes made, that the importance of people working together to do that. So I think it would be great if there could be some way of bringing people together to do that. I go to lots of separate meetings of universities, of colleges, apprenticeship providers of different national governments, and nobody's actually taking part in a bigger debate.
Thanks, Hugh. David Hughes, over to you.
Yeah, and I'll follow on from that. I mean, I completely agree. We really must try to work better together. We need a proposition for whichever government comes in to power. The idea that the loan system is going to cost £8 billion more a year by 2030 will concentrate the minds in Treasury to the point where every single college and every single university will suffer. We have a responsibility as leaders in the sectors to come together to put a much more positive proposition that shows Treasury what the positive return on investment would be of investing. And we're not doing it. You know, we are, as Hugh said, making separate arguments in different fora to different parts of government very ineffectively, I think. I think the tertiary approach could bring us together. I don't think there's anything that colleges and universities will lose by working well together locally and nationally. And I really think we just got to focus on that. There's so much more to win than there is to lose by working together.
Thanks, David. Rachel.
Well, at the risk of sounding just repetitive, I mean, I totally agree with both of the previous comments. I mean, from what I have seen, I don't think there is much desire to be in competition from individual institutions, though I do think that, as one of my previous panel members said, you know, they are looking, because money is tight, at other income generation, which might well put them in competition with somebody else who's doing it. So it does arise, but I think that the intent generally is one of collaboration. What is missing is the fora and the time and the headspace to actually get together and people convening those kind of conversations. And I also agree that, you know, I think the problems in the system are fairly well known, could be documented so that they're kind of agreed and kind of not put to bed, but, you know, that there isn't a kind of agreed proposition of what some system and future system needs to look at. But moving the conversation onto that more kind of constructive and creative solution to the problems, which doesn't just involve money, even though it would be nicer if there was more money and Treasury did put, you know, money behind their skills rhetoric. But I think that would be great. And I think there is potentially a role for HEPI and Advanced HE and others to act as that convener. That would be my provocation to you two.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And David, to you for the last word.
I think probably similar comments. Looking forward, we need a system that is more effective and more efficient. And that requires us to learn from the past, but actually develop something from the future, which could and should be very different from what we currently have. And to get us to that point, I do think we need more clarity around the national framework. I do think we need to look more holistically at cross-departmental funding levers. But I firmly believe that to give us the flexibility and the ability to deliver, it's got to support accountability of institutions, which requires autonomy of institutions. You can't have accountability of institutions being managed by micromanagement other than the stakeholders within those institutions.
Thanks very much, David. Colleagues, we're coming to the end of our session today. Thank you so much for coming along. I hope it's been useful to you. It has reminded me helpfully at the start of a new year of the duty we have always to make the system better, knowing we can never, at least in the lifespan of our careers, make it perfect. A big thanks to our panellists and all those who asked questions, and thanks to Nick and his excellent team, including Emma at HEPI. Please do watch out for more on this topic from Advance HE and HEPI, and all the very best of wishes for the rest of the week and the work you're commencing as we begin a new year. Thank you, colleagues, and all the best.